Game art is one of the hardest things for me, so in this video I'm going to attempt to make something polished and pretty that I would actually be happy using in a game. The first thing I did was find some reference art from Valheim and tried breaking down the things I liked about it. Valheim is a gorgeous game that is a great example of art direction over just realism. There's a lot we could break down with this style, but the two things I wanted to focus on are color gradients, more on that in a minute, and layering, so I could create a parallax effect. The color gradients Valheim uses really help create a sense of depth and scale. For example, in the reference photo, there's two types I want to recreate. First is the gradient for depth. Close objects, like these trees, start with normal colors, but as they get further and further away, they change to an atmosphere color. In real life, this comes from light scattering more over further distances, especially with things like fog and clouds. The second is the gradient across the image that I'm going to call the atmosphere gradient. This goes from bright, warm colors to dark, cool ones, and besides being pretty and colorful, makes it feel like the sky is actually refracting sunlight like it would in real life. I decided to make a quick sketch to plan what I hoped would be an interesting layout, and then hopped into Clip Studio to get started. Once I had the layout sketched, I started creating test gradients to see how it might look using the reference image. I ended up using a sunset gradient that's warm by the horizon, and then it gets darker and cooler as you move upward. And then I quickly added some mountains that I think turned out really nice, made a simple tree trunk, and added a gecko for a sense of scale. I've been practicing drawing geckos for a couple of weeks now, but I'm leaving this as basic as possible to focus on the environment. Next, I used a leaf brush to fill in where I might want some leaves to be, and then left them in black and white since I'm hoping to overlay that with the gradient that I made earlier. To finish this outline, I added a sky gradient and a simple sun overlay, and then it was time to get started on the hard part: leaves. I made a lot of different attempts on this. First, I wanted to overlay the gradient that I made earlier, but I never bothered learning how to do that, so instead I hand painted some different leaves with the brush. It looked really cool and super vibrant, but it doesn't have any depth. So next I decided to add some shadows and a little bit of mass behind the leaves, which once again looked really cool, but it still didn't feel like it captured what I was trying to do in the reference. This is when I realized I forgot how light worked, and by having the sun in the background, it meant that the shadows should be on this front side of the leaves. So I tried switching that over, and it looked cool, but it still was kind of missing things from the actual reference. So I removed the sun, and I just tried to simplify things a bit. The idea would be that the sun is now behind the camera, and it's going to be somewhat overcast or foggy, so there's going to be relatively soft lighting. I had a couple of more failed attempts, but what changed everything for me was simplifying this even further. I scrapped the colorful atmosphere gradient, and I just wanted to focus on the depth gradient. I took another try of thinking about how a massive tree like this would actually fill in with leaves, and I came up with these cool shelving branches that I really liked. What made a huge difference was choosing a proper color gradient for showing depth, and I used 4 different colors for this. In the foreground, I started with a bright leaf color, then I had a shadow leaf color, and then this would change to a shadow atmosphere color, and finally a bright atmosphere color. To actually paint this, I just sampled different steps along the gradient, and then I gradually decreased the leaf size with each layer, so you got the illusion of depth. The result looked awesome. I was very surprised I could make something that actually looks this nice, and to finish this concept up, I added some patches of fog and tinted the mountains to match the atmosphere color. It still wasn't perfect, but at this point I was ready to test this in motion. Parallax is one of my favorite effects for 2D games. I've used it before in my rip-off of Flappy Bird, but the basics of it is that objects closer to the camera will move faster than further away objects. In that game, I used a treadmill effect where each layer would move past the camera and jump back in front when the image became out of view. I'm going to use the same technique here, but instead of treadmilling each layer once it's out of view, I have to wait until all layers of the branch are moved out of the camera's view, and then move the whole thing in front of the camera. This is to prevent the layers from separating, because without it, the foreground would eventually outrun the background and they'd all break apart. To create this in Unity, I redrew a new set of branch layers, all in white, so that way I could easily recolor them using the sprite renderer. I imported these into Unity, then set each layer to move at a different rate. Using some built-in gradient objects, I could also nicely recolor each layer, including a separate color for fog, all at runtime. Finally, I just had to create a treadmill effect that indefinitely scrolled upwards, and I'm really happy with this. There's still plenty to fix, like the leaf opacity not being full in some places, adding some more branches with organic shapes since it looks kind of blocky, and obviously optimizing it so it's not using so many different layers at such a high resolution when a lot of this could probably be faked or reused. But overall, I think it looks really good, and thanks for watching.